Welcome to Double Portion Inheritance with Maria Merola and Gary Wold, brought to you by DoublePortionInheritance.com. Since 1981, Maria heard the call of Yahuwah to become a watchman to the house of Yisrael and to those within the traditional Christian church. She was instructed to warn them against the false doctrines and pagan traditions of men. After 25 years of studying Scripture, the word of Yahuwah came to Maria again in 2007 as she was called out of the corporate world to become a full-time intercessor and prophetic teacher. The name of the ministry, Double Portion Inheritance, was given to her after she received the revelation of the two houses of Israel from Ezekiel 37:16. The mission of this ministry is to bring together the stick of Judah and the stick of Joseph for the return of the Messiah, Yahushua. And now, Maria Merola.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and today is January 1st, 2022. It's the pagan New Year. Obviously, those of us who know the truth know this is not the true New Year. I do have a YouTube video about that. If you guys want to listen to my teaching on when is the true New Year, you can go to my YouTube page. We did it a couple years ago, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. DPI Ministries, when is the real New Year? So you can listen to that, and I tell you when the true New Year is according to Scripture, which is told to us in Shemot or Exodus 12, when Yahuwah was delivering Israel out of Mitzrayim or Egypt. He said to them in Exodus 2, "This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you." And then in Exodus 13:4, he identifies the name of the month and tells us it's the month called Abib. Now, the word Abib means green ears of corn, but not maize corn. It's barley corn, okay? So right here in Exodus 3:4, he says, "This day came you out in the month Abib." And so I talk about that in that video. So I go into a lot of detail about the calendar, when the new year is, and how Pope Gregory changed the calendar. Prior to him, it was Julius Caesar. So we have the Julian calendar and then the continuation of that with Pope Gregory. So Rome has been instrumental in changing the times and the seasons. And we read about that in Daniel chapter 7, verse 23 and through 25. It says right here, I'm using my e-sword here. It says, "Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and tread it down, and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time." Now, what's interesting is, and this is in my blog about the Sabbath. I have a blog about the Sabbath, but it talks about the fact that in Ferris's Ecclesiastical Dictionary, it says that the Pope has the power to change times and laws, even the precepts of Christ. And so based on that, they believe that they had the authority to change the Sabbath from the 7th day of the week to Sunday after the sun god. So I recommend that you read as well. Let me see if I can find it so you can have access to it. Covenant Sabbath versus dispensationalism. So here it is. This one is called A Covenant View of the Sabbath versus Dispensationalism. And this blog is really what it's based on is a friend of mine a few years ago, I think it was back in 2008. She sent me an article by this guy named Ray Comfort. Many of you know who he is. He's a street evangelist from I think he's from Australia. And he wrote this article called Freedom from Sabbath Keeping. Can you believe it? And he gives all these reasons why, as Christians, or when, we don't call ourselves Christians, but Christians are not required to keep the Sabbath. And so what I did was one by one went through every one of his arguments and totally debunked what he said, came back with scripture to prove his fallacious arguments. So if you want to read that, that's where I get into the part about the Pope changing the times and the seasons. Before we get into the main teaching of today's podcast, which is going to be part 3 of who confirms the covenant of Daniel's 70th week, I'm going to share with you something I wrote yesterday, which I think is important to understand, because coming up on January 6th, we're going to be seeing President Donald Trump address the nation again from Mar-a-Lago. And it's important to understand the occult meaning behind what is going on. So this is what I wrote on Facebook a few days ago. I said the insurrection of the false Messiah on January 6, 2021 at the Capitol Dome, a.k.a. the womb of ISIS. It's important to understand that in the occult world, within Freemasonic principles, the Egyptian obelisk, or what they call the Washington Monument, is supposed to be a phallic symbol. It's supposed to represent the phallus of Nimrod or Osiris. Okay, Osiris is the Egyptian name. Nimrod is the ancient Chaldean name. The dome, the Capitol Dome, is a carbon copy of Rome. Rome has the same dome and obelisk across from each other. And so the dome is supposed to be the womb of Isis, or the womb of, the Queen of Heaven. The Bible talks about that in Jeremiah 7 and also in Jeremiah 44, the Queen of Heaven. Well, the Catholic Church believes that Mary, the Virgin Mary, that she is the Queen of Heaven. That's what they've named her. And of course, we know that's false. She was just an ordinary human being like the rest of us. She was a woman of Yah. She was obedient to the Torah. She was definitely a holy woman of Yah, but she definitely was not the Queen of Heaven, as they falsely call her. They also say she's the third person of the, Trinity, which of course that's ridiculous. They call her they say the Holy Spirit can only operate through her. And so the Catholic Church has a false Trinity that they teach, and that false Trinity, I'll bring up the picture if I can find it here. You'll see this a lot in Catholic artwork, where you'll see they call it the Holy Family. The Holy Family. Okay, there it is. You got, supposedly the Jesus, which is really Tammuz or Horus. And then you got the father, Nimrod, which in Egyptian his name is Set. And then you've got Semiramis, Isis, or Mary right here. And they're both crowning her. They're both crowning her the Queen of Heaven. And you got the Holy Spirit above her head. And, I just wrote this. It says, false Roman Catholic Trinity originated in Babylon with Nimrod, who married his mother Semiramis. Now, some people would say that there's no evidence for that Nimrod married his mother Semiramis. Look, it's not really about historical accuracy here. What it's about is that in the occult world, they have come up with all this mythology, and they want you to worship according to their mythology. So at the Tower of Babel, these ancient stories migrated to different parts of the world, and in whatever culture that story migrated into, the story took on a different name. It kind of morphed into different variations of the same story. But, this doesn't have to be historically accurate. What we're portraying here is that there are mythologies, and this ancient mystery Babylon religion is based on mythology. And however they want to rewrite the story, basically Semiramis, I have a write-up on that. I'm going to be turning it into a blog. And there was such a woman named Semiramis. Now, was she married to Nimrod? That's, that's debatable. Some people say yes, some people say no. It's irrelevant. The fact is, Nimrod was the great-grandson of Noah, and he was the first one to attempt the one world religion and the one world government. He was essentially the first anti-Messiah, character. So this same story was told in Egypt under different names: Isis, Horus, and Set. The Roman Emperor Constantine told the same story in the 3rd century under the names Mary, Jesus, and Heavenly Father. So getting back to what I was showing you there on Facebook. So the Capitol Dome in Freemasonry, they believe that's the womb of Isis. And they believe that the Washington Monument, which is Nimrod's phallus, impregnates her. That's why when the presidents take the inaugural address, when they get inaugurated and then take their oath into office, they face the obelisk. And so they believe this is something called sex magic. They believe that they are invoking demonic powers by conducting these rituals. Okay. So on the winter solstice, December 21st, 2021, Trump announced that he will be addressing the nation once again on January the 6th, 2022 from Mar-a-Lago. Now, the name Mar-a-Lago, I looked it up and I was shocked this past week to find out what it means. Mar-a-Lago means in Spanish from sea to lake. So mar is sea, like where you get the word maritime or marine. Lago is lake. And think about this. Revelation 13:1 says that the beast rises up from the sea. Okay? So there's something here. Something going on January 6th. The word lake as a verb, I found this out in Merriam-Webster's dictionary. This is quite interesting. This word lake as a verb means to cause blood to undergo a physiological change in which the hemoglobin becomes dissolved in the plasma. Isn't that interesting? And you can go there yourself and see. I'm not making this up. Merriam-Webster, as a noun, but as a verb, it says to cause blood to undergo the process by which hemoglobin becomes dissolved in the plasma. Very interesting. Now, this kind of reminds me of, many of you may remember, many of you may not remember, but October the 5th I think it was October 1st of last year, 2020. Well, now it's almost 2 years ago, but, it's October 1st, 2020. Trump tweeted on his Twitter account, my blood is the max. And I'm saying it differently, my blood is the max. Maxine. And then his son, Don Jr., tweeted that his father had donated for Maxine research, plasma. Okay, so it's no coincidence that this was announced on the winter solstice, just as the rollout of the MOTB. For those that you don't know what that is, it's in Revelation 13, MOTB. Mark of the figure the rest out. So it's no coincidence that this was announced on 2020, December the 21st, 2020. They rolled it out. Another important thing that took place at the winter solstice of 2020 was that Trump was named the most admired man in America by the Gallup poll. And what's interesting about this is that Revelation 13:13-4 says the following. And it says, and I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast, and they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him? Well, this Greek word wondered, if you look it up, And the concordance, the Greek concordance, it literally means admired. So all the world admired the beast, right? And he survived two impeachment attempts. And people will say, who is able to make war with him? Who is able to come against him? Why did these events take place on the winter solstice? Well, because Satanists and occultists require the blood of sacrificed infants to perform their sex magic rituals. And we know that the snake bites, is what I call it, the snake bites contain the blood of sacrificed infants. So the question we must ask ourselves, why were the events of January 6, 2021 at the Capitol Dome carefully planned as a Luciferian sex magic ritual? Well, the ritual that was played out in front of our eyes last year is based on Kabbalah magic. And for those of you that don't know, Donald Trump has admitted in some of his earlier books that he's written, I think one of them is Art of the Deal. He has had a Kabbalah magic teacher since the 1980s. His name is Eitan something. I forgot the last name, but he's been studying Kabbalah magic for a very long time in preparation for the role he's currently playing. So in Kabbalah magic, it is called controlled opposition, which what that means is they make him look like he's against the Illuminati. They make it look like he's against the global elites, but in reality, he's another plant. Okay? It's where they deliberately make Trump look like the persecuted martyr, the Messiah, because that's one of the things people say all the time. Well, how could he be the bad guy when everybody hates him so much? I'm like, that's part of the controlled opposition. Okay? If you wanted to make somebody look like the Messiah in the eyes of the public, how would you do it? You would make him look like the underdog, right? Because everybody loves an underdog. When somebody's being attacked and persecuted and he's the underdog, people want to rally support for the underdog. That's a human emotion. We feel sorry for the guy that's just constantly being beat up on. So last year on January 6th, Trump was close to enacting the Insurrection Act. Now, can you remember the charges that were brought against our Messiah on the Feast of Passover in Mark's Gospel? Well, since the Luciferians don't honor Passover, they conducted their sex magic ritual on the Roman Catholic Feast of the Epiphany. Now, this is important because the word epiphany in Greek means God manifest, and it has a numerical value of 666 in Greek gematria. There was another anti-Messiah leader in history named Antiochus Epiphanes. He gave himself this title in 167 BC as he erected a statue of Zeus in the Jewish temple, and he claimed to be the manifestation of God. Okay, I'm using the word God because that's what they use. Okay, I never use the word God in connection with Yahuwah. I only use it when we're referring to pagan deities. Okay, Mark 15, 6-7. Now at that feast, he released unto them one prisoner, whomsoever they desired. So the feast, of course, was Passover. Okay, but Mark 15:7 says, and there was one named Barabbas, which lay bound with them that had made insurrection with him, who had committed murder in the insurrection. So Barabbas was guilty of insurrection, but the Romans allowed Barabbas to go free of insurrection, but they falsely accused our Messiah of the insurrection. Do you see what's going on here? How they did this to make Trump look like the Messiah? They were making Trump look like the Messiah by accusing him of insurrection. And why did they do it on January the 6th? Well, as I said, January 6th in the Catholic Church is called the Feast of the Epiphany. It's when they falsely teach that the Magi, the wise men, or the magicians visited the Messiah in Bethlehem. Now, last year's events, when they had those people come to the Capitol Dome. It was called the Million MAGA March. And the fifth degree of Satanism, when you reach the fifth degree, it is called MAGA. Okay, that's the English name for it. But in Latin, it is called, Latin and Greek, it's called magus, which magus is how you say magician. It's the same thing as when the wise men came, they're trying to make it look like the way the wise men came to visit the Messiah in Bethlehem. The MAGA people, the magicians, came to visit Donald Trump at the womb of Isis. Okay. In a televised interview, the spirit cooking witch, Marina Abramovich, and you can find this on YouTube. I think one of the YouTubes got taken down, but I'm going to have to look for it again. The spirit cooking witch, Marina Abramovich, said that Trump is playing the role of the magician in the tarot cards. She said he is being used to bring in the age of enlightenment and to wake us up. Okay? So you see, Trump was setting himself to look like the Messiah. He invited the Magi, the fellow magicians, wearing MAGA hats to help him conduct the insurrection. Meanwhile, the liberal opposition then cried, impeach him. This is very similar to crucify him. Interestingly, in Revelation 13:14, the Greek word for sword is makira, which literally means judicial punishment. Okay? And it says that the beast survived a deadly wound by a sword and that he lives. Okay, Revelation 13:14 says, and he deceives them that dwell on the earth by means of those miracles, which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. Well, this prophecy was partially fulfilled last year. You see, I don't believe that the ultimate fulfillment has already been fulfilled, but there are, let me see if I can find that golden image statue here. Okay, last year, they made this golden image at the CPAC event of Trump right after he survived 2 impeachment attempts. In other words, the deadly wound by the sword, okay, which the dictionary defines impeachment as judicial punishment, right? Right after he survived a deadly wound by a sword and lived, what did they do? They made a golden statue of Trump at the CPAC event. Okay? They made an image to the beast who survived the deadly wound. Also, this is also interesting. Harry Reid, who was involved in Trump's first impeachment, remember it was in 2019 when they were accusing him of, Russian collusion. Because I remember when he did that press conference, it was August 2019, and he said, I am the chosen one. That was right after he survived the impeachment. That was 2019, August 2019. So yeah, interestingly, Harry Reid, who was involved in the Trump impeachment process, died on December 28th, just a couple days ago, just before Trump addresses the nation one more time on January 6th. I think this could be a satanic human sacrifice. Now, of course, he was already sick with cancer, but how perfect to take somebody that's already sick with cancer and make it look like, well, he just died of cancer. But it's possible, I mean, what are the odds of him, Harry Reid, the guy that was, one of the main, people involved in Trump's impeachment process in 2019, he dies just a few days before Trump's about to address the nation. Again, from Mar-a-Lago. So to understand more about the satanic ritual of Apollyon coming up from the bottomless pit at every presidential inauguration, I highly recommend this video. It's $14.99, but it's worth it. It's on Vimeo. It's called Belly of the Beast. And we've watched it several times. There's a lot to understand about what takes place at a presidential inauguration. So I highly recommend that you guys make yourself aware of what's going on before this event happens so that you understand what the occult world is doing and that you don't get played into thinking, oh, that's just terrible what they're doing to Trump. He's the persecuted martyr. It's all by design. Okay, it's all by design. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start with part 3 of who confirms the covenant of Daniel's 70th week. Now, I highly recommend watching part 1 and 2. And here's a graphic I made to go along with this teaching. And as you can see, the graphic says Messiah stood in the gap. Okay. Now, the word gap is talking about the gap between the two houses of Israel, the two divided houses. And, when Tamar gave birth to twins in Genesis 38, one twin was named Peretz, and his name means to cause a breach or to cause a gap. Okay. The other twin was, I forget his name now, it just slipped my mind. It's in Genesis 38. Let's see, Genesis 38, Judah and Tamar. She gave birth to twins. One of them was Zerah, which means rising of light. Okay. And the one named Zerah, he had the scarlet cord around his wrist because the midwife would put the cord around the wrist of the child that came out first, but he withdrew. He withdrew his hand, and then the other child came out. Peretz, he typifies the kingdom of Judah because, it was the kingdom of Judah that caused the gap. They're the ones that caused the breach. It was King Solomon who caused the breach. And he's the one that caused the two divided houses because he taxed the people and he wouldn't. His son, Rehoboam, refused to lower the taxes. And so 10 of the tribes left the kingdom of David and went with King Jeroboam. That's in 1 Kings chapter 12. So Messiah stood in the gap between the two divided houses of Israel, and he repaired the breach. He caused there to be a 2,000-year gap in history called the fullness of the Gentiles. And that phrase is used in Romans 11:25 as well as Genesis 48:19. He did this in order to heal Israel of their blindness. Now, first you have Abraham's covenant that was conducted between animal pieces. Those animal pieces were divided in half, Genesis 15:17. Then you have Jacob's household divided over Joseph's coat. That's in Genesis 37:3. The brothers were jealous, so the whole house became divided. Okay. Solomon almost divides a baby in half with a sword. 1 Kings 3:24. Two harlots symbolic of the two houses of Israel. Okay. Ezekiel 26 talks about this, that Yahuwah called both houses of Israel harlots, sister harlots. There was Jerusalem and Samaria. And the one harlot, both of these harlots lived together under the same roof. They both had baby boys, but one woman accidentally smothered her baby boy to death in the middle of the night. And what did she do? She swapped out her dead baby from the other woman and took the other woman's living child. And in the morning, the woman who had the living child recognized that the other woman took her child. And so they went to King Solomon. And what did King Solomon say? He says, bring me a sword. Now, he did this to test the women to see which one was the true mother. But the sword, we know, is symbolic of the sword of the Spirit, which is the word, right? The word is like a sword. It divides bone and marrow. It says in the book of Hebrew, the word of Elohim is like a sword, sharper than any two-edged sword. So these two harlots were, in a battle against each other. They were at odds with each other. But he tested them by attempting to divide the child. And we know that the child, the heir, you see, women could not inherit a piece of land in those days unless they had a male heir. So we know the child represents the Messiah. He's the male heir, that neither one of these women could inherit the land unless they had a male heir. So when he's threatening to divide this child, the real mother says, no, 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 don't divide the child. Let the other woman have the child. She had compassion and loved her child so much, she was willing to let the other woman have the child rather than to see her child killed. But the other woman didn't care if the child was killed. She said, I don't care. Divide the baby in half. Doesn't matter to me. Why? Because she didn't care for the child. That's how he tested who the real mother was. But the point of all this is now we understand why the Daniel's 70th week had to be divided in half. There's a prophetic purpose why Daniel's 70th week had to be divided in half. Okay? And so in 1 Kings 12, we find out that both houses were divided. Remember the Roman soldiers. They cast lots to divide his garment. Okay? Matthew 15:24. And what do we have here? We have the priest in the temple lighting the menorah. And the 7 branches on the menorah are symbolic of the 7 feast days. And Daniel's 70th week was divided in half at Pentecost. Why? Because Yahushua fulfilled Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits, and then he poured out his spirit on Pentecost. Now, when the 2 witnesses begin their ministry, they are going to pick up where he left off, and they're going to also have a ministry of 1,260 days, just like our Messiah had a ministry of 3.5 years or 1,260 days. So Messiah died between what? Between 2 thieves. The 2 thieves are also representative of the 2 harlots. Why did he die between 2 thieves? Because the 2 houses were divided, and they still are technically, even though he accomplished the making of the one new man in the spirit, in the cosmos, in the natural realm. It hasn't been all the way fulfilled yet, but in the spirit, he's already done it. Okay, so Messiah died on 2 crossed trees. These are the 2 sticks of Ezekiel. The cross did not start out as a pagan symbol. Of course, the Catholic Church tried to hijack the cross and use it for Tammuz, but the 2 crossed sticks represent the 2 sticks of Ezekiel. And he died on 2 crossed trees for the 2 houses. He died between 2 divided houses, the 2 thieves. And what did he do? He repaired the breach. Isaiah 58:12 says that those of us who are kings and priests with him during the millennium, we will be used to repair the breach. And he also stood in the gap. Ezekiel 22:30 says that there was no man that would be able to stand in the gap, but that Yahuwah chose the man who would stand in the gap. And that one who would stand in the gap is our Messiah. So therefore, Daniel's 70th week was divided in half. Okay. Now I know that, Michael Rood, I respect Michael Rood. I love Michael Rood, but he teaches that Messiah's ministry was only 70 weeks. I disagree with that. I totally disagree that Messiah's ministry was 70 weeks. That cannot be supported by scripture. In fact, if you go with me to Luke chapter 4, you'll see that our Messiah hinted and told us that his ministry was just like that of the prophet Elijah. So right after his 40-day fast, Yahushua went into the synagogue, and what does he do? He reads the Isaiah 61 scroll, and he says, the Spirit of Yahuwah is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised. And what does he do next? He preaches to preach the acceptable year of Yahuwah. Okay, now here's what's interesting. This verse comes from Isaiah 61, verse 2, but he cut the verse in half. Now, why does he cut the verse in half? Why does he read only half of the verse and he hands the scroll back to the scribe in the temple? He closes it. He doesn't finish the verse. Okay, there's a very prophetic reason why he did this. Go with me to Isaiah 61 and you'll see the same thing. Isaiah 61:2 says to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahuwah and the day of vengeance of our Elohim, to comfort all that mourn. Okay, why didn't he read that part of the verse? Because the day of vengeance is for the future. It's for another Yom Kippur in the future when he returns riding on white horses with his collective bride. And let's go to Revelation 19, and you'll see this with me. Okay, this is Revelation 19. This is when Messiah returns. Verse 2 says, for true and righteous are his judgments, for he has judged the great whore, which did corrupt the earth with her fornication, and has avenged. You see, this word avenged comes from the same root word as vengeance. Okay, vengeance. This is the day of vengeance that he was talking about. But you see, in Isaiah, Yeshayahu 61, the day of vengeance of our Elohim is for the future. It's when Yahushua returns to the Mount of Olives and he lands his feet on the Mount of Olives, according to Zechariah 12. Okay, so why did he only read half of the verse? Well, he only read half of the verse because he knew that there was going to be a gap in history. There was going to be a gap in history where at the first coming, he only fulfilled half of Isaiah 61:2, which was to preach about the acceptable year. Well, what is the acceptable year? That's a Jubilee year. Every 50th year is called an acceptable year. Okay, so when he began his ministry, it was a Jubilee year. It was in the year 28 AD. And the reason we know this is because Josephus, the Jewish historian, told us that the 79th Jubilee in history was in the year 23 BC. In 23 BC, it was a Jubilee. Now, if we add 50 years to that, it takes us to the year 28 AD. This is when our Messiah began his ministry, after his 40-day fast in the wilderness. And so he came in a Jubilee year. Now, what's interesting is that in Numbers chapter 10, it says that the high priests, after the sons of Aaron, were the ones that were supposed to blow the 2 silver trumpets when it's a Jubilee year. Okay? But here we have our Messiah, who's not from the tribe of Levi. He's not of the sons of Aaron. He's from the tribe of Yehuda, Judah. Okay? And he's preaching the acceptable year. So you can imagine that these people are going, wait a minute, he's not a Levite. How is he the one that's able to announce the acceptable year? I thought that was reserved for the sons of Aaron. Okay? Because in Numbers chapter 10, let's go there. Let's see, does it talk about the silver trumpets? Or wait, maybe it's not. I got to look it up in the Bible Gateway. Silver trumpets. Yeah, it is Numbers 10. I guess I just didn't notice it. Okay. So what does he say? He says, make you 2 trumpets of silver, and a whole piece shall you make them, that you may use them for the calling of the assembling and for the journeying of the camps. So you see, this was the time when they were supposed to be blowing the trumpet was in the Jubilee year. And when they shall blow with them, all the assembly shall assemble themselves to you at the door of the tabernacle of congregation. If they blow but with one trumpet, then the princes, which are heads of the thousands of Israel, shall gather themselves unto you. So the blowing of the 2 silver trumpets was specifically for a Jubilee year. That's what they did it for. Okay, and now we have Messiah Yahushua announcing the acceptable year in a Jubilee year, and these people are thinking, who does he think he is? He's acting like he's the high priest. See, he's letting them know, I'm Melchizedek. I'm the high priest now. You see, John, his cousin, was a Levite, and 40 days earlier, John baptized him. Why? Because as the high priest was supposed to wash himself before conducting the Yom Kippur sacrifice. It says this in Leviticus 16. So Messiah was actually having the role of the high priest transferred back to him from the sons of Aaron. And John, doing the role of the high priest that year, placed his hand on Messiah's head and transferred the sins of the people onto the sacrificial goat. That's what the priest was supposed to do on Yom Kippur. He was supposed to confess the sins of the nation onto the live goat, and that goat would later be killed. Okay, Yahushua was portraying the role of the sacrificial goat at his baptism. But John, when he saw him coming, said, behold, the Lamb of Elohim who takes away the sin of the world. So John recognized that he was going to portray the living goat that gets killed for the sins of the people. So John transferred his role as high priest to the Messiah. And after he is baptized, you understand, baptism is a prophetic picture of death. Okay, what does it say in Romans chapter 6? Okay, the Apostle Paul, Shaul, says, he says, know you not that so many of us as were immersed or baptized into Yahushua HaMashiach were baptized into his death? Therefore we are buried with him by baptism into death, that like as Mashiach was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. So when he was baptized, when Yahushua was baptized or immersed by his cousin Yahuchanan, John, he was portraying the pattern of the sacrificial Yom Kippur goat. Then what happened? The Spirit, the Ruach, sent him into the wilderness as the scapegoat. Okay, that's part of the Yom Kippur twin goats. One goat is killed, one goat is sent away. So Yahushua portrayed the role of the twin goats for Yom Kippur that year. When he came out of his 40-day fast, now he enters the synagogue and he's portraying the high priest. You see this? He's preaching the acceptable year, which only the high priest of the sons of Aaron were supposed to do. But now he, from the tribe of Judah, is doing it. He's literally showing them, I'm Melchizedek. I'm the same one who met Moses Abraham, not Moses. I'm the one that met Abraham, in Genesis. He's the same Melchizedek that met with Abraham. And what did he do? He closed the book. He gave it back to the scribe, and all the eyes of them that were in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began to say to them, this day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears. But then what does he say? He goes on and he describes his ministry as being just like that of the prophet Eliyahu. He says, verily I say unto you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. But I tell you of a truth, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, when great famine was throughout all the land. But unto none of them was Elijah sent, save unto Sarepta, a city of Sidon, unto a woman that was a widow. So he just got done telling them that his ministry would be like that of Eliyahu, and his ministry was 3 years and 6 months. There's 3.5 years. Get it? See, he's hinting. He's letting us know his ministry would be just like that of Elijah's, Eliyahu, 3.5 years. Okay, so right there we have the hint. We don't need to wonder if his ministry was 70 weeks. It wasn't. As much as I love Michael Rood, I don't agree with him on that. It wasn't 70 weeks. It was 3.5 years. Okay. And that's important because, see, the Daniel 70th week is a 7-year period. And in the middle of that week, we find out in the midst of the week, Daniel chapter 9. Let's go to Daniel chapter 9. Okay, Daniel chapter 9. Verse 26. And after 62 weeks, that's 62 weeks out of the 490 weeks. After 62 weeks shall Messiah, not 490 weeks, I meant to say 490 years, 70 weeks. So 62 out of the 70 weeks, okay? After 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, okay? And the people of the prince, that would be the armies of General Titus, the Roman armies of General Titus, that shall come, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. So that's the Roman war in 70 AD. And what does it say here? It says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. That's Passover week. But not only was it Passover week, it was the last 7 years of this 490-year prophecy. And then it says, in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. So it was our Messiah in the middle of Daniel's 70th week, in the middle of that last 7 years, he is the one that caused the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. But not only was it in the middle of the week, as in 7 years, it was also in the middle of the literal week, because he died on the 4th day of the week. It was what we would call Wednesday today. He died in the midst of the 7-day week. The 4th day of the week, he resurrected on Shabbat. He resurrected on the 7th day. He died on the 4th day. Okay, so he died within the week, within the week, within the week. So he died in the middle of the literal week, Passover week. He died in the middle of the 7 years, and he also died in the middle of the 7,000 years. Okay, so it was in the 4th millennium. So he died in the middle of the week, within the week, within the week. You see, he had to die in the middle of it in order to do what? To repair the breach. He stood in the gap. By him dying in the middle of that week, he stood in the gap. He repaired the breach. Okay? And so this brings me to the part where we left off in part 2. And so our Messiah was cut off in the midst of the week, the last 7 years of Daniel's 70th week, or in the middle of Jacob's 7 years of trouble. Okay? So in the same way that our Messiah was cut off during the midst of these 7 years, so shall the bride be saved during the middle of these 7 years. And this is what he meant when he says, except those days should be shortened. There should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days should be shortened. Okay? And this is important because a lot of people don't understand what he meant when he said, except those days should be shortened. Well, it's very important that you read this blog called Except Those Days Should Be Shortened, because you're going to learn from this blog that the middle of the week being cut in half was by design. And when he said, except those days should be shortened, that it's already been shortened. Daniel chapter 12 tells us that those days were already shortened in advance by the cutting in half of Daniel's 70th week. So you're going to learn that when you read that blog. It's going to make so much sense to you. Enmity and rivalry causes a breach in the house. So you see, there was enmity and rivalry between Jacob's two wives. Jacob worked for Rachel for 7 years, just as Yahushua will work for his bride for a total of 7 years. I have often wondered, well, why did Jacob or Jacob work for 2 periods of 7 years for his 2 brides, Rachel and Leah, for a total of 14 years, yet our Messiah only worked for half of that period? I also wondered why Yehusaph, Joseph, worked for Pharaoh for 2 periods of 7 years as well. In other words, 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. Why did our Messiah have a ministry that lasted for 3.5 years, followed by another 3.5 years in the future by his 2 witnesses? So he's going to allow his 2 witnesses to finish the week. Why is there a 2,000-year gap between these 2 periods of 3.5 years? Well, let me explain the gap theory. Now, some people have argued against the idea of there being a gap in history during the last 7 years of Daniel's 70th week. However, we can easily prove that there is a 2,000-year gap between these 2 periods of 3.5 years in the midst of Daniel's 70th week. Now, let's consider the 2,000-year gap between the fulfillment of a Yom Kippur at our Messiah's first coming in Luke chapter 4 and his second coming on Yom Kippur in Revelation 19, which is what I just got done reading to you. Okay? You see, as I've already stated, in Luke 14:19 or 4:19, Yahushua read half of Isaiah 61:2 when he declared that he had come to preach the acceptable year of Yahuwah. He then closed the scroll, gave it to the minister, and said to the people present in the synagogue, "This day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears." However, Isaiah 61:2 has a second part to it that he didn't read. What was it? It was, "And the day of vengeance of our Elohim to comfort all that mourn." Why did he stop cold in the middle of this verse? Why did he not read the latter part of the verse in Isaiah 61:2? It is for this very same reason that he was cut off in the midst of the week, causing the sacrifice and the oblation to fail to be accepted. See, there's a 2,000-year gap between the first Yom Kippur that he fulfilled at the beginning of his ministry when he had completed his 40-day fast in the wilderness and the second Yom Kippur that he will fulfill at his second coming. Revelation 19:2. And we see how he is going to fulfill the day of vengeance for his beloved bride. For true and righteous are his judgments. For he has judged the great whore, which did corrupt the earth with her fornication, and has avenged the blood of his servants at her hand. So here is another gap in history, in prophecy. In Acts chapter 2, 17 through 21, the apostle Kepha or Peter announced the beginning of the end time fulfillment of the prophecy of Joel 2:28 through 32, even though much of it has yet to be fulfilled just before the second coming of Messiah. Okay, so remember, Peter or Kepha preached a message that 3,000 souls were added to the Messianic community. And when he preached, he referenced Joel. And that was Joel's prophecy talks about the very end of the end, but yet the end times was beginning even back then. So there's this gap, this 2,000-year gap between Pentecost when Peter Kepha preached that message and then the final fulfillment of Joel 2:28 through 32, which is in the days we're currently living in. So there's a 2,000-year gap in Joel's prophecy, and that gap is made obvious by Peter Kepha saying these events are happening now, but they will continue into the very end. 2,000 years ago, on the day of Shavuot in Acts chapter 2, they started calling that the last days. Because why? It was the latter 2,000 years out of the 7,000-year week from the creation until Messiah returns to marry his bride. That 7,000-year period, the last 2,000 years are considered the tail end of it, right? The last 2,000 out of the 7,000 would be considered the last days. Okay? A house divided against itself cannot stand. So, to answer this question that had eluded me for almost 30 years, but now in recent times, I had begun to understand why our Messiah only fulfilled half of Daniel's 70th week with 2 3.5 year periods of ministry. And why was it only half the amount of time that Jacob and Joseph both served? You see, Jacob served 14 years for his 2 brides. Joseph served 14 years for the 2 houses of Israel, the Egyptians and the house of Israel. When did they come? In the 5th year of the second half. In the 5th year of the latter 7 years, during the famine. So in other words, when there's two years left, that's when Joseph's family came. So you see, the latter 2,000 years of the 7,000 year creation week, that's the same thing as when Joseph's family came in the 5th year with 2 years left of the famine. Okay. The reason why, because both houses of Israel have been divided in half. Okay. And I already explained Solomon divides the inheritance, which is the living son. You know, have you ever been baffled over the fact that Solomon was ready to slice the baby in half? When I first read this, it seemed barbaric that he would even think of such a thing. However, as I've already explained, there's a deeper meaning to this story than what meets the eye. And I'm not going to go back over it again because I've already explained it. You can go back and read the whole, the whole account. But what's interesting here is that in 1 Kings chapter 3, going by verse 20, it says, and she arose. This woman's child died in the night. This is the one who she smothered her child by accident. It says she overlaid it. She didn't mean to kill the child, but she did. And it says, and she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me while your handmaid slept and laid it in her bosom and laid her dead child in my bosom. So this is familiar language. In the parable of the 10 virgins in Matthew 25, 5-9, do you recognize what is familiar? In both of these stories, the women arose at midnight. They arose at midnight. The foolish woman who stole the baby from the wise woman is the same foolish virgins who had no oil in their lamps, and they wanted to borrow the oil from the wise virgins. Okay? So the foolish wanted to borrow the oil from the wise virgins, just like the foolish woman borrowed the wise woman's baby. Okay? Matthew 25, 5-6. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight there was a cry made, behold, the bridegroom comes. Go you out to meet him. You see, the dead son represents the crucified Messiah, okay? But the living son represents the resurrected Messiah, who is able to redeem both harlots. But if the living son was killed, neither of them could be redeemed. This is why Messiah had a ministry of 7 years that was divided in half. By dividing his ministry in half and having a gap of 2,000 years for the Gentiles, it gave the 2 houses of Israel a chance to see how foolishly they were behaving by rivaling with one another. Only those who humble themselves will receive the living Son, the resurrected Messiah, and thereby have their inheritance and their land redeemed. Okay? Here's the story of Solomon's trial with these 2 harlots in 1 Kings chapter 3. And it says in verse 21, and when I rose in the morning to give my child suck, behold, it was dead. But when I had considered it in the morning, behold, it was not my son, which I did bear. And the other woman said, no, but the living is my son, and the dead is yours. And this said, no, but the dead is your son, and the living is my son. Thus they spoke to the king. So they're fighting over this living child. Then said the king, the one says, this is my son that lives, and your son is the dead. And the other says, no, but your son is the dead, and my son is the living. And the king said, bring me a sword. Okay, that's the sharper than any two-edged sword, right? The word of Yahuwah is the one. The word of Yahuwah divides us, does it not? Does it not? Yahuwah said that he came to bring division. And the king said, bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, divide the living child in two and give half to the one and half to the other. Then spoke the woman whose the living child was unto the king, for her bowels yearned upon her son. And she said, oh, my Adon, my master, give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. But the other said, let it be neither mine nor yours, but divide it. So the one mother showed how selfish she was. She didn't care about the child's well-being. All she cared about was herself. She knew that even if the child was divided, she would still be able to get her inheritance. Okay. Verse 27, then the king answered and said, give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. She is the mother thereof. You see, in this story, both harlots represent the two houses of Israel, Judah and Samaria. Samaria was the capital of the 10 northern tribes of Ephraim. The living son is the Messiah who would later on be born to the nation as their kinsman redeemer to redeem their inheritance. The woman who loved the child was like the wise virgin who would then inherit the double portion. Or in other words, the entire living child, not half of the living child, and not a dead child divided into two parts. Now we can see why our Messiah had to divide the two periods of 7 years, so that Jacob, who worked for Leah and Rachel, and, he worked 2 periods of 7 years. And he was cutting this in half because the two houses are divided in half. These 2 periods of 7 years, he was dividing even that 7 years in half. In other words, he was cutting the covenant, just like he did with Abraham. What did he have Abraham do? He told Abraham to divide those animal pieces in half. And what did he do? He walked between the pieces. In other words, he stood in the gap. Okay? In this story, the child represents the inheritance. And as long as both women are in rivalry, the kingdom will continue to be divided and it cannot stand. So, in order to test these women to see who deserves to inherit the one new man, in other words, the man child, right? Or in other words, the double portion, a living son, they must go through tribulation. You see, the Hebrew word for tribulation is sarah. And you know what it means? It means a tight and narrow place. What is a tight and narrow place? It's a birth canal. Okay? The tribulation is like a birth canal. When the woman of Revelation chapter 12, she has a crown of 12 stars on her head, right? She gives birth to the man child. Who is that? That's the one new man. That's the 2 witnesses that are killed in the previous chapter. When the 2 witnesses, the 2 olive trees, the 2 houses of Israel, they are killed and they are resurrected. She, Jerusalem, which is the mother of us all, according to Galatians 4:26, Jerusalem is the mother of us all. She gives birth to the one new man. Okay, and when she gives birth to the one new man, she too is redeemed. Okay, now this explains what Shaul or Paul meant in 1 Timothy. chapter 2 when he says that Eve was in the transgression because she was deceived. But he says, but she shall be saved in childbearing. Okay. What did he mean that she shall be saved in childbearing? In other words, he was uttering a prophecy when Jerusalem, the mother of us all, gives birth to the one new man, the man child, the resurrected two witnesses, she too will be redeemed. Okay? So after King Solomon died, his kingdom was divided into two nations under the reign of his son Rehoboam. But it was all because of King Solomon and his many wives who led him into idolatry. And this would be the main cause for why the kingdom would be divided. See, Solomon had been warned ahead of time by Yahuwah in Malachim, 1 Kings 11, 9 through 10. It says, and Yahuwah was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned from Yahuwah Elohim of Israel, which he had appeared unto him twice. And he commanded him concerning this thing that he should not go after other gods, but he kept not that which Yahuwah commanded. So he had already told him twice and he didn't listen. He gave Solomon a chance and he didn't listen. So then in verse 11 it says, wherefore Yahuwah said unto Solomon, for as much as this is done of you, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely rend the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. Notwithstanding, in your days, I will not do it for David, your father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of your son. Howbeit, I will not rend away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for David, my servant's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, which I have chosen. You see, now we understand why the entire kingdom of Israel and Judah was about to be dealt a crushing blow in 70 AD under General Titus. You see, the kingdom of Judah continued in the same idolatry as Solomon, and our Messiah prophesied that their kingdom would finally be destroyed as he gave them ample time to repent, but they did not. Matthew 12:25, and Yahushua knew their thoughts and said unto them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. So, how did the kingdom of Israel become so divided in the first place? Well, it all began with the rivalry between Rachel and Leah, and the jealousy never stopped from there. And to this very day, there continues to be rivalry and enmity, hatred between both houses of Israel. You know, Ephesians 2:15 through 16 talks about this enmity. Even though our Messiah came to abolish in his flesh this enmity at his first coming, the gap or the breach has been getting more narrow as we get closer to his second coming. The gap or the breach will finally be repaired when he returns. You see, now we can understand the reason for there being 3 animal sacrifices with the Abrahamic covenant and why the animal pieces had to be divided in half. Okay, so in Genesis 38, we read about Tamar, the daughter-in-law of Judah, and her husband died, leaving her childless. Judah gave her his other son Onan, but Onan refused to do the duty of a kinsman redeemer by raising up seed for his dead brother. Therefore, Yahuwah slew him. You see, this is called a Levirate marriage. It's when a woman dies having no seed to carry on her dead husband's name. The brother of the dead can marry her, or, at least give her a child. He doesn't have to necessarily marry her. He can just give her a child. And that's what happened here. You see, Judah promised to send his third son, Shelah, when he was grown. But Judah himself ended up becoming the kinsman redeemer when Tamar dressed up like a harlot and she tricked him. You see, Judah then impregnated Tamar and she bore twins by him. You see, even though Judah said he was going to send his son, Judah, the father, ended up becoming the kinsman redeemer. This is proof that the father became the son. The father himself, Judah, who's the father of these three sons of his, promised to send Shelah, which Shelah is a word that means from the same root as Shiloh, which means peaceful kingdom. It has to do with the millennium, Messiah's peaceful kingdom. He promised to send Shelah, but he ends up becoming the kinsman redeemer. What that shows us is the Father himself put on human flesh and became the kinsman redeemer. Bereshit, Genesis 38. And it came to pass as he drew back his hand that behold, his brother came out, and she said, how have you broken forth? This breach be upon you. Did you catch that? Breach. There's a breach now. This breach be upon you. Therefore his name was called Peretz. And guess what that name means? Peretz means breach. Literally means breach. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zerah. Zerah. Okay, so in this story, the name of the twins, Peretz, means breach, and the name of the other twin, Zerah, means rising of light. And he is the one who bore the scarlet thread to symbolize the Yom Kippur sacrificial goat. Okay, in other words, one goat gets killed on Yom Kippur and the other one gets sent away into exile. In other words, Zerah symbolizes Messiah, who would later on repair the breach caused by the other twin, who symbolizes the scapegoat who was sent away because of idolatry. You see? In other words, both houses at one point had been sent away to the nations because of their idolatry. And both houses of Israel, Yehuda and Ephraim, have been guilty of causing a breach or a gap in the covenant. Yahuwah foreknew that this would happen. Therefore, he established the Abrahamic covenant in advance for three groups of people, as I mentioned at the beginning of this blog. You see, in these last days, the born-again Gentiles who forsake the mother harlot church system and they begin to obey the Torah, that is when they will sojourn back to Jerusalem with these two houses of Israel, Judah and Ephraim, and they shall be the ones who cause the breach to be repaired. Okay? And Yeshayahu, Isaiah 58:12, it says, and they that shall be of you shall build the old waste places. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. Now, I'm not saying that we should go back to Jerusalem now, but I believe when Yahushua comes back, he's the one that's going to gather his elect from the four corners of the earth, from the four winds of heaven, and he's the one that's going to bring us back into the land. Okay? Repairs of the breach. Okay? In order for us to be called repairs of the breach, to repair the breach in the covenant with both houses, Yahuwah commanded Abraham to divide the animal pieces because he knew that in the future the two houses of Israel would also become divided. What did these animal pieces represent in Genesis 15? Well, you see, the ram symbolizes the firstborn son, because in Genesis 22:13, when Abraham was about to offer up his son, Yitzhak, Isaac, on the altar, Yahuwah sent a substitute offering, which was a ram. This is why the ram symbolizes all those who were born again of incorruptible seed through Messiah. Okay? In other words, if we are born again of incorruptible seed, we will be like our Messiah. We will become that substitute. The two witnesses at the end of their ministry of 3.5 years, what happens? They're killed. Okay? I hate to tell you that, but becoming part of the firstborn son means that, now, of course, Isaac wasn't literally killed physically, but there was a part of him that had to die that day. He had to be willing to die. He didn't have to physically die, but in his heart, he had to come to terms with the idea that he would have to die. He had to come to terms with that. Okay? So the bullock represents the house of Ephraim because you see, Ephraim is likened unto a bullock in Jeremiah 31:18 and also in Deuteronomy 33:17. It says Ephraim is like a bullock. The goat represents the house of Judah, in Zechariah 10:3. And finally, the turtle dove and the pigeon represent the birds of prey. They will eat the flesh of all those who rejected Messiah in the last days. So the birds of prey are there to clean up the garbage. Revelation 19:21. You see, when the fowls came down on the divided pieces, Abraham had to drive them away because they symbolize the adversary, the devil, who has always wanted to devour the inheritance. This is why Yahuwah walked between the pieces to close the gap in the divided house. And this is why Messiah divided the 7 years for Rachel into 2 periods of 3.5 years. And this is why there has to be a 2,000-year gap between both covenants and the restoration of both houses of Israel. This 2,000-year gap is called the fullness of the Gentiles. Romans 11:25. The purpose of this gap was to accomplish the very same thing that King Solomon accomplished when he tested these two harlots, to see who was the genuine mother. In Revelation 12:1-5, there's a woman who gives birth to a man-child. Who is the woman? Well, you see, this prophecy has a dual fulfillment. At the first coming of Messiah, the woman in Revelation 12 was Miriam. Okay, but it was also Jerusalem too, because Jerusalem is the one that brought forth the son, Messiah. Okay, so Miriam, his mother, she's the literal woman who gives birth to the man-child. However, before his second coming, the woman in Revelation 12 is Jerusalem, the mother of us all, Galatians 4:26. And the man-child is the one new man, described by Paul, Shaul, in Ephesians 2:15. In fact, if you really need extra confirmation, let's go to Isaiah 66. Okay, let's go to Yeshayahu 66. What does it say? It says in Isaiah 66, before she travailed, she brought forth. Before her pain came, she was delivered of a man-child. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day? Or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. Shall I bring to the birth and not cause to bring forth, says Yahuwah? Shall I cause to bring forth and shut the womb, says your Elohim? And then he goes on and says, rejoice you with Jerusalem. Be glad with her, all you that love her. Rejoice for her. Rejoice for joy with her, all you that mourn for her. That you may suck and be satisfied with the breasts of her consolations, that you may milk out and be delighted with the abundance of her glory. For thus says Yahuwah, behold, I will extend peace to her like a river, and the glory of the Gentiles shall like a flowing stream. Then shall you suck, you shall be borne upon her sides and be dandled upon her knees. As one whom his mother comforts, so will I comfort you, and you shall be comforted in Jerusalem. And when you see this, your heart shall rejoice, and your bones shall flourish like an herb. So you see, the woman who gives birth to the man-child in Revelation 12 is the same woman that's being spoken of here. It's Yerushalayim. Okay? Now, I know there's people that say that Israel didn't really become a nation in 1948. They say, oh, that's not the true Israel. That's the fake Israel. No, it's not. Look, we know there's a heavenly Jerusalem. We know those that are born from above will put on incorruption, and we will receive the name of the new Jerusalem. It says that right here in Revelation chapter 3. Okay? It says, to him that overcomes will I make a pillar in the temple of my Elohim, and he shall go out no more. And I will write upon him the name of my Elohim and the name of the city of my Elohim, which is New Yerushalayim, which comes down out of heaven from my Elohim. And I will write upon him my new name. Okay, but listen, the two houses of Israel are divided still. So there's those that are born from above. You know, Abraham had two kinds of seed. Did he not? Did not Abraham have two kinds of seed? Sand, sea. Come on. Trying to find the verse. Sand, sea. Here we go. So Genesis 22:17, he says that in blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I will multiply your seed as the stars of the heaven. Those are the ones that are born from above. If you're born again by the blood of the Lamb, you are part of the seed of Abraham, who are of the stars of the heavens. And as the sand which is upon the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. So if you are a literal descendant of Abraham, meaning, you know, you carry the same physical DNA, then you are of Abraham's descendants of the sand on the seashore. So he had two kinds of seed. And because he have two kinds of seed, Yahuwah has to operate in a dual fashion with these prophecies. He has to operate in a dual fashion because he has two kinds of seed to deal with. Okay? So the woman, Jerusalem, she's the sand on the sea. She's the physical, literal descendant of Abraham. But those of us that are born again by the blood of Messiah, we are the stars of the heavens, and we too get to be part of the inheritance with the earthly Jerusalem. Okay, so you have to understand that Yahuwah is in the process of taking the earthly and the heavenly, and he's slowly working them together until they become one, so that at the end of the millennium, when the new heaven and the new earth comes down, there will no longer be the need for the earthly Jerusalem. There will only be the heavenly Jerusalem. But all throughout the millennium, all throughout the 1,000 years, there's this working together, just like the woman with the, it's in Matthew 13:33. The woman who had the dough, the ball of dough, right? And he likens the kingdom unto this woman. He says, another parable spoke he unto them. The kingdom of heaven is like unto the leaven, which a woman took and hid 3 measures of meal until the whole was leavened. Well, who are these three measures of meal? 3. Okay, you got 2 houses of Israel, the house of Judah, the house of Ephraim. And the 3rd measure is the Gentiles, the nations. So what is she doing? She is taking this ball of dough and she's kneading it and kneading it and kneading it until the whole ball of dough is fully incorporated. Okay, in this parable, the leaven is the gospel message. It's not the leaven of the Pharisees. The leaven has a different meaning in this parable. The word leaven means that which permeates. So the leaven in that parable is about the gospel message, the good news of Messiah. So the woman with the 3 measures of meal, she represents the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, who is taking these 3 groups of people and she's working them together until everybody becomes one. And so in the meantime, there's these factions still. There's these factions, and the earthly Jerusalem will continue for 1,000 years with Messiah as the ruler, the king, for 1,000 years. But at the end of that, the new Jerusalem and the new heaven and earth comes down. Okay, so he's going to give those that are of the earthly descendants of Abraham a chance to come up to speed, to catch up to the rest of us who are born again. He's going to give them a chance to catch up to us, to where we're at. Okay, so this one new man consists of the born again Yehudim, Jews, as well as born again Gentiles, the converts. And like the 2 harlots that were tested by King Solomon, the true mother of this child was willing to forfeit her inheritance so that the son might live. The other woman was not the genuine mother because she only cared for her own interests. Thus, the true bride of Messiah only cares for the sheep as she lays down her life for them, just as our Messiah did. John 10:15. When these two harlots realized that their rivalry would result in neither one of them having an inheritance, the real mother revealed herself. Similarly, Yahuwah has caused this 2,000-year gap to exist to test both houses of Israel in order to show them how foolish they have been to allow division and sibling rivalry in the house. And as a result, neither of these two houses has the inheritance, but the Gentiles now have what they were meant to have all along, which is the living son. Okay? So when Jacob gave the blessing that belonged to Reuben and Simeon, his two eldest sons, to Joseph's son, Ephraim and Manasseh, his two sons, they were greatly humbled by this, and they suddenly realized that their jealousy and rivalry would cost them their inheritance to the heathen nations. Joseph's sons were regarded as Gentiles because they were born in Egypt, but they were the original sons of Jacob, even though they were born in Egypt. And he did not bless Reuben and Simeon, even though Reuben and Simeon were directly from Jacob's loins. He only blessed Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, okay, because there was no sibling rivalry with them, okay? But the sibling rivalry with Reuben and Simeon against Joseph cost them their inheritance. You see, in these last 2,000 years, we've seen a gap or a breach between both houses of Israel. But now in these last days, that breach is about to be repaired, okay? And let's look at that word in the Strong's Concordance for Peretz, the name Peretz, the twin that Tamar bore who had the scarlet cord. It means a breach. It means a gap. It means bursting forth. It means a broken wall, okay? As you can see by the definition, the Hebrew word for breach is describing what the Apostle Shaul Paul wrote about in Ephesians 2, where he says that Messiah has broken down that middle wall of partition between both houses of Israel. In other words, Yehudim, Jew, and Goyim, Gentile. What was the middle wall of partition? Okay, it was a literal wall. It was a wall that the rabbis built around the outer court of the temple in order to keep the other lost tribes from returning back to the covenant. Messiah came to break down that wall or that breach. And so we're going to stop here. And we've got a little ways to go with this teaching. So we'll probably finish next week.
Yahuwah bless you and keep you. Yahuwah make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Yahuwah lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom. We hope you've enjoyed today's broadcast and that you are encouraged in your walk with Messiah. For more teachings, subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell to be notified of our latest content. Visit Maria's many blogs at doubleportioninheritance.com. That's doubleportioninheritance.com. This ministry is made possible by the prayers and support of listeners like you. To make a donation by PayPal or Venmo.com, use the email address doubleportioninheritance@gmail.com. That's doubleportioninheritance@gmail.com. On behalf of Maria and Gary at Double Portion Inheritance Ministries, may Yahuwah bless you.